They say war is chaos. I learned to control chaos. I could plan for flak, predict fighter interceptions based on altitude and sun angle, and calculate fuel consumption down to the last liter. But the real war, the one that breaks a man's soul and a nation's will, starts when you realize the enemy isn't fighting for victory. They're simply drowning you in a volume of steel so vast that your life, your mission, and your entire fighting force become a mathematical casualty to be erased. My name is Major Elias Thorne, S3 Operations Officer for the 381st Bomb Group, Heavy, based at Molesworth. I wasn't a pilot. I was the man who drew the lines on the maps, the man who signed the order assigning crews to missions. I was the accountant of the dead. It was late October 1943. The stench of stale coffee, cold grease, and ozone from the churning radios was the permanent perfume of the operations center. The room felt hermetically sealed against the outside world, yet every screech of static, every whispered name, delivered the brutal, unforgiving reality of the Reich's air defenses straight to my gut. I was hunched over the mission logs from last week's deep penetration strike towards Frankfurt. Target, ball-bearing plants. Result, 17 fortresses returned out of 36. 10 aircraft completely unaccounted for. 960 men in this group alone had already gone missing since our first missions. And the worst part? The losses were predictable, almost formulaic. I ran my index finger along the red line marking the point where our P-47 Thunderbolt escorts were forced to turn back. We called it the divorce point, but the crews called it the gamble line. Past that line, the B-17s entered the loneliness zone. Major? Lieutenant Jenkins, a fresh-faced meteorologist, paused by my desk, holding a stack of weather charts. The usual, Jenkins, I murmured, not looking up. Hi, Cirrus, light turbulence, visibility good above 20,000 feet. Perfect hunting weather for the bastards. I rubbed my eyes. The problem was not the flak, though the flak was terrible. The problem was the predictable, almost ritualistic behavior of the Jagdgeschwader. They weren't fools. They knew the constraints of American aviation physics just as well as we did. They understood the limitations of the Thunderbolt's mighty, but thirsty Pratt and Whitney double Wasp engine. They wouldn't engage until the P-47s, burning fuel like drunken gods fighting gravity at 28,000 feet, were forced to swing north and head home. The Germans would wait, circling just out of range, the Me-109s and the brutal FW-190s, and then, precisely when the radio crackled with the heartbreaking farewell of our escort, the Germans would swarm. It wasn't a fair fight. It was execution. The B-17 was tough, a legendary piece of engineering designed to soak up damage and keep flying. It was a flying fortress, yes, but no fortress can withstand continuous, unchallenged, concentrated attack from 20mm cannon shells. We were selling our airmen for industrial targets, and the exchange rate was rapidly becoming unsustainable. I slammed the casualty report down. I had said 20 aircraft deep last time. I was planning to send 22 tomorrow. Statistically, I was signing death warrants for 4 to 5 crews. Every signature felt like the sickening thud of an axe hitting bone. We had built the best bombers in the world, believing that mass formations and heavy defensive fire, the mutual protection concept, could see them through. We were wrong. The Germans didn't fear the Fortress's 13.50 caliber machine guns. They feared the physical laws that dictated our range. And right now, physics was Hitler's most effective ally. Unless we could break that alliance, the daylight strategic bombing campaign was doomed. The briefing room the next morning was tense, cold despite the inadequate heating. 100 young men, bundled into sheepskin jackets, huddled around the large table dominated by the oversized map of Europe. The target was Kassel, roughly 400 miles from the coastline, deep enough to hurt. I took the stand, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. My voice, dry from lack of sleep, echoed slightly in the hollow room. Gentlemen, today's mission profile. I pointed to the map with a long, thin stick, the tip pausing over the industrial heart of central Germany. High explosive and incendiary loads. Primary target is the Fiesler Aircraft Works, producing the FW-190. A low, collective groan swept the room. Fiesler meant fresh, angry German fighters. I moved the stick, outlining the route. Escort will be provided by the 56th Fighter Group, P-47 Thunderbolts, 2 groups total. Their operational ceiling is 30,000 feet, which is where we will be operating. I brought the stick back, stopping sharply at the red dashed line, the divorce point. The Thunderbolts will escort us to approximately this point, just east of Aachen. They will remain with us for 20 minutes past the border maximum. After that, I looked them straight in the eyes. You will be on your own. Standard mutual protection doctrine applies. A pilot, Lieutenant Kramer, raised a gloved hand. He had flown 10 missions and looked 30 years older than his 21 years. Major, the last time we hit deep, the P-47s left us 60 miles short of the critical engagement zone. We lost 4 out of 5 after they turned back. The air thickened. I knew he was right. I also knew Colonel Hume, the group commander, wanted me to lie, to say the P-47s had new drop tanks that they'd push further. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Lieutenant Kramer, I stated, my voice level, pragmatic. The P-47 is a phenomenal fighter. It's a tank, fast and heavily armed. But its operational radius is dictated by the limitations of its engine and the fuel load required for high-altitude fighting. They are carrying maximum fuel, including the drop tanks. They will turn back when they must, to ensure their safe return to England. We cannot risk the P-47s being forced down over enemy territory. I paused. This was the moment of truth, the moment I felt the weight of my S-3 position most acutely. The estimates predict a concentrated defense effort starting roughly 30 minutes after the Thunderbolt withdrawal. That means roughly 45 minutes of unescorted flight time over hostile territory before target acquisition, and another 45 minutes after the bomb run. The silence that followed was devastating. It wasn't fear of combat. It was the cold realization that the odds were mathematically stacked against them. They were being asked to fly through a known 90-minute kill zone. Colonel Hume, standing sternly in the back, cleared his throat, a clear signal to move on. However, I pressed, defying Hume's silent command. Intelligence suggests the main German interceptor force will be split this morning, chasing 2 smaller feints towards the coast. We anticipate lower overall density on the final approach. I had no reliable intel confirming the feints. It was hope masquerading as data. But the crews nodded, grasping for any shred of reassurance. Later, Hume cornered me outside the debriefing room. Thorne, I explicitly told you to emphasize the effectiveness of the P-47 cover, not its limitations. His voice was a low, dangerous rasp. Sir, if I lie and they realize they've been abandoned prematurely, the resulting loss of morale will be worse than the loss of the aircraft. They need to understand the physics of the mission. They need to trust the numbers, even if the numbers are bad. Hume's face was dark. Trust? They need resolve, Major. And resolve is harder to maintain when you tell them they're flying into a predictable slaughter. You sign the mission orders, Thorne. You better pray you see better than 17 back this afternoon. I walked back to my office, the pressure of the upcoming mission orders heavy in my leather-gloved hand. I wasn't praying for their return. I was waiting for the inevitable statistical correction that was due the 8th Air Force. The wait was the worst part. It wasn't the noise of war, but the profound absence of it, the strained silence of the operations center in the late afternoon. Every man stared at the large wall clock, willing the sweeping hand backward. The predicted time of return came and went. Then the buffer zone. Then the agonizing delay. Hume nodded slowly. He looked like an old man suddenly confronted with his mortality. "Find the answer, Major, or we might as well pack up Molesworth and go home. We are 1 or 2 more Schweinfurts away from total strategic collapse." I sat there late into the night, the mission map spread out. The problem was clear, simple, and utterly intractable. How do you shrink 1,000 miles of hostile territory? You can't. But maybe, just maybe, you could find a way to make the air miles cheaper, more efficient, and longer. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings in London, high-level briefings at 8th Air Force Headquarters, and endless technical consultations. My role shifted from mission planner to logistics detective. I was tasked with finding a solution to the range problem, no matter how politically or technologically inconvenient. The options were pitiful. Option 1, more drop tanks on P-47s. Feasible, but dangerous. The massive Thunderbolts already struggled with external load, and the increased drag meant worse performance in combat, burning the extra fuel almost immediately. We'd gain 10 minutes of coverage, maybe. Not enough. Option 2, P-38 Lightning. The twin-engine P-38 had better range, but it was sluggish and unpopular as an escort at altitude. Its complex cooling systems frequently failed in the bitter cold, grounding more planes than the Germans did. Option 3, change tactics. Fly lower? That meant suicide by flak. Fly faster? Impossible for the heavily loaded B-17s. Fly at night? We'd lose the precision strategic targeting that justified our losses. I was fighting against thermodynamic reality. I spent a long night in a drafty hangar, looking at the monstrous 18-cylinder radial engine of a P-47. It was a beast, delivering colossal power. But every horsepower came at the cost of gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. At 30,000 feet, where the air was thin and frigid, the engine had to be force-fed air via turbocharger, gulping fuel to maintain performance. It was a trade-off, invincible in a dive, but a slave to the tyranny of the tank capacity. "You look like you're trying to calculate the weight of despair, Major." An unfamiliar voice cut through the metallic clang of a nearby crew chief working on a bomber's landing gear. It was Captain Jensen, an engineering liaison from Wright Field, the Air Technical Service Command. He had the sharp, precise eyes of a man who trusts only slide rules. "I'm trying to break the sound barrier of logistics, Captain," I replied grimly. "I need a fighter that can fly 1,600 miles and still fight like a tiger at the end of the run. And it needs to do it with an engine that doesn't drink like a thirsty elephant." Jensen leaned against the cold aluminum skin of the Thunderbolt. "The problem, Major, isn't the power. It's the efficiency at altitude. These radials are designed for ruggedness, not economy up here." "I know. The Germans use liquid-cooled inline engines, the Daimler-Benz 601 and 605. They're more efficient, sleeker, but less reliable. We need the best of both." Jensen grinned, a thin, meaningful smile. "What if I told you we already had a design that utilized the best wing structure in the world, and we were about to graft the most efficient, high-altitude engine on the planet onto it?" He pulled out a wrinkled photograph. It was a sleek, low-wing fighter, unfamiliar in its aggressive elegance. It looked completely different from the blunt, powerful P-47. "The P-51, Major. But not the Allison model. That one's a dog above 15,000 feet." He tapped the engine cowling in the photo. "We're talking about the P-51B, the one with the English heart." I felt a faint flicker of professional interest cutting through the exhaustion. An unknown variable. A disruption to the equation. I was ushered into a tightly guarded technical briefing room at the 8th Air Force HQ in High Wycombe. The atmosphere was charged, part technical optimism, part operational anxiety. Jensen was there, along with representatives from North American Aviation and, most critically, a small, impeccably dressed Englishman from Rolls-Royce. The meeting focused entirely on a slide projection of a P-51, specifically the P-51B model. Major Thorne, the North American representative began. You are concerned with range and high-altitude performance. Let me introduce you to the solution. The Mustang airframe itself is revolutionary. It incorporates a laminar flow wing design. He explained the concept. The wing was shaped so that the air flowed smoothly over a much larger surface area before separating, drastically reducing drag. This was the first piece of the puzzle, efficiency through aerodynamics. But the original Allison V1710 engine lacked the necessary boost for high-altitude work. I interjected, still skeptical. It's irrelevant to our B-17 missions. The Rolls-Royce man, Mr. Davies, took over, his voice precise and calm, carrying the weight of British engineering history. That is precisely where we intervened, Major. We replaced the Allison with the Packard V1650. That is our Merlin engine, manufactured under license in the States. He highlighted the key difference. The Merlin engine, specifically in its V1650 version, used a two-stage, two-speed supercharger. The German inline engines rely on single-stage supercharging, which means they lose efficiency rapidly above 20,000 feet. The American radials rely on turbocharging, which is power-hungry. The Merlin's two-stage system is engineered specifically to compress thin air effectively, maintaining optimal manifold pressure right up to 30,000 feet, and doing so with significantly better fuel economy than any engine currently used by the Americans at that altitude. I felt a slow, cold realization wash over me. I wasn't listening to sales talk. I was listening to the sound of geometry being defeated. I looked at the projected numbers. Aircraft engine type, fuel capacity, internal/external, max escort range, approximate. P-47D Thunderbolt radial, turbocharged, 370/2 by 108 gallons 400 miles. P-51B Mustang, Merlin, V12 inline, two-stage supercharged, 184/2 by 108 gallons, plus option for 75 gallons inner wing, 850 miles. The drop tanks are the key, Jensen added, pointing out the mounting points under the wings. Because of the P-51's superior aerodynamics and engine efficiency, those external tanks don't just extend the range, they double the P-47's radius. We can go 850 miles, drop the tanks, and still have a full 300 miles of combat fuel on the internal tanks. I leaned forward, my hand resting on the table. The figure 850 miles sang in my head. That covers Hamburg. It covers Berlin. It covers every single industrial target in the Reich except possibly the farthest corner of Austria, I whispered. The North American man nodded, satisfaction playing on his lips. We don't just reach the target, Major. We stay until the mission is complete. We turn the loneliness zone into the escort zone. For the first time since I had started counting the bodies, I felt a surge of hope, not abstract, but grounded in hard, irrefutable engineering fact. This machine wasn't fighting the laws of physics, it was optimizing them. This was the technological checkmate we desperately needed. Despite the staggering numbers, the introduction of the P-51B was met with immediate, grinding skepticism from senior command. They loved the ruggedness and firepower of the P-47. The Mustang felt delicate, untested, and suspiciously new. It's too pretty, Thorne, one general grumbled during a planning session. And it's liquid-cooled. One hit to the radiator, and the engine seizes. The Thunderbolt can fly home with half a wing missing. Sir, I argued, showing him the detailed loss reports. The P-47s are incredibly tough, but their toughness is irrelevant if they can't even reach the battle. We are currently losing aircraft due to lack of defense, not lack of armor. We need presence over prowess. The decision was eventually made. The P-51s would be integrated slowly, starting with a few test squadrons to prove their mettle and, crucially, their reliability. My task was to monitor the operational tests, comparing the new P-51B's flight data against our established P-47 profiles. I flew to Debden, where the 4th Fighter Group was converting from P-47s to the Mustang. I met the pilots, men accustomed to the heavy weight and diving speed of the Thunderbolt, now flying this light, responsive, sleek machine. "Feels like a bloody Spitfire on steroids," commented Colonel Don Blakesley, a key proponent of the P-51. "Except it carries enough juice to cross the Atlantic twice." I watched the first long-range trial. The objective was a simulated round trip to Munich, a distance previously unreachable for sustained escort. I stood in the radar shack, watching the small green blips on the screen. The P-47s were represented by thick, confident blips that, predictably, hit their limit and reverse course. The P-51s, however, continued. "They're still going, Major," the radar operator whispered, his voice laced with awe. "They've passed the Gamble line by 100 miles. The flight lasted 6 hours. When the Mustangs returned, the fuel gauge checks were revolutionary. They had enough reserve to have fought a fierce engagement and still made it home comfortably. The secret was the altitude efficiency. The Merlin simply sipped fuel at high cruise. I felt the statistics in my head rearranging themselves. The Germans had designed their defense around a known perimeter, a geographical and mechanical limit. Now, that perimeter was gone. The map had changed. My internal monologue solidified. This is not just a faster plane. This is a strategic weapon. This is the industrial answer to the tactical brutality of the Luftwaffe. I returned to Molesworth and pinned the updated map on the wall. I extended the blue line, the new P-51 escort radius, deep into the Reich. The line reached past Kassel, past Leipzig, all the way to Berlin. The loneliness zone had shrunk to a small, manageable puddle. The skepticism of the pilots, however, remained. They hadn't seen the P-51 fight deep yet. They had been abandoned too many times. They needed proof written in tracer fire and downed enemy aircraft. The first true operational test came in late December 1943. The target, an aircraft component factory near Ostersleben, deep in central Germany. The mission profile was complex. P-47s and P-38s would cover the initial approach, and 2 squadrons of the P-51B Mustangs would take over at the previous divorce point, pushing the escort limit deeper by another 150 miles. I was in the ops center, tracking the mission, listening to the chatter. The first part was routine. Flak was heavy but manageable. P-47s reported successful engagement with initial German waves and turned back at the prescribed time. Then, the key moment. A fortress radioed, panic evident in the navigator's voice. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high, they are 190s, heavy attack vector, no sign of our escort, we are alone." The voice broke off, replaced by static. My stomach clenched. Had the Mustangs failed? Did the distance prove too much? A moment later, a new voice, clipped and professional, cut through the noise, the voice of a P-51 pilot. "Fortress leader, this is Mustang Red 1. We are engaging the bogies. Hold formation. You are not alone." Silence, followed by the distinctive sound of multiple .50 caliber machine guns firing in unison, a deep, tearing sound. Then, a report from the bomber. "Red 1, thank you, thank you." They broke off. 2 definitely down. "Where the devil did you come from?" The Mustang pilot laughed briefly. "We came from England, sir. We've got fuel for the rest of the trip." I checked the map. The Mustangs had intercepted the Germans precisely where the Luftwaffe expected to operate with impunity. Intelligence debriefings after the mission confirmed the German reaction. We had tapped into their frequency. The enemy pilots were clearly shocked. Where are they getting the range? They are over the Harz Mountains. Their thunderbolts always turn back here, one recorded German transmission revealed. The losses for the Ostersleben mission, 3 B-17s lost. Still losses, but compared to the expected 8 or 9, it was a profound reduction. The success was not measured only by the bomber losses, but by the impact on the enemy. The P-51s didn't just survive deep penetration. They surprised the German defenders in their own backyard. The Luftwaffe suddenly realized their sanctuary, the loneliness zone, was gone. The hunting ground was now a contested battlefield. The true significance of the Merlin-powered Mustang was not that it could fly far, but that its presence forced the German pilots to change their entire tactical doctrine. They could no longer wait for the escort to leave. They had to engage the escort immediately, or lose their chance at the bombers. This shift was critical. Engaging the P-51, a supremely efficient and maneuverable fighter, meant burning up Germany's most precious and finite resource, their experienced pilots. The strategic momentum shifted dramatically in early 1944. The American High Command, seeing the irrefutable data from the early Mustang missions, pushed the production rate hard. By February, enough P-51s were operational to allow for maximum effort deep strikes. The moment came with the planning of Operation Argument, the Big Week, a coordinated series of attacks targeting Germany's aerospace industry, designed to cripple the Luftwaffe once and for all. The target for my group, the 381st, was an aircraft assembly plant just outside Berlin. The deepest target yet. The briefing room was quiet, but this time, the tension was different. It wasn't the tension of certain death. It was the tension of maximum risk for potentially maximum reward. I stood before the assembled crews. The map behind me showed the route. Gentlemen, the total distance is 1,500 miles round trip. We are going deeper than ever before. You will be flying with the 357th Fighter Group and the 4th Fighter Group, equipped entirely with P-51Bs. I pointed to the target. Look at the blue line. It goes all the way there. And it goes all the way back. Your escort will not leave you. I looked at Lieutenant Kramer, who was flying today. His expression wasn't resigned. It was grimly determined. Expect the heaviest flak and the most concentrated interceptor assault ever recorded. The Germans know what we are doing this week. They will throw everything at you. But for the first time, you will have the continuous, high-altitude protection you need. My final words were simple, cutting through the bravado and the professional calm. Stay tight. Drop your bombs. Come home. Your escort will fight their way to the target and fight their way back, right alongside you. As the crews filed out, the air felt heavier, thicker with the collective weight of the impending strategic gamble. If the big week failed, the bombing campaign would be discredited entirely. If it succeeded, we would gain air superiority over Europe. The fate of the ground invasion, D-Day, depended on the performance of a V-12 engine coupled with a perfect wing design. I retreated to the ops center. My role was now that of a silent observer, a conduit between the action and command. For the next 8 hours, my world would be reduced to crackling radio reports, plot markers, and the agonizing movement of time. The mission proceeded like a dark symphony. First, the methodical droning of the B-17s, then the reports of initial flak, harsh static spikes, and finally, the escalating crescendo of combat chatter. The German response was ferocious, exactly as predicted. They scrambled hundreds of fighters, FW-190s, and Me-109s, some even carrying rockets to break the formations. The airwaves were a cacophony of clipped, professional jargon. Mustang leader to Fortress leader, we have 18 bandits at 2 o'clock high, engaging now. Watch the tail guns. The battle raged at the established limits of the old escort, east of Hanover. The difference now was that the Mustangs didn't just hold the line. They attacked it, splitting the formation of German fighters, forcing them into dogfights where the P-51's speed and maneuverability at altitude were devastating. The tension peaked as the formation approached Magdeburg. This was the deep, deep territory. The Germans launched their final reserves. A frantic voice cut through the controlled chaos, a bomber pilot from a different group. "We're hit! Engine 4 out, hydraulic failure, steering sluggish. We are breaking formation, we are falling behind. They're coming for the straggler." My heart hammered against my ribs. A straggler was a dead man. The Luftwaffe doctrine was simple. Eliminate the straggler, watch the remaining formation break to help, and then eliminate the broken formation. I grabbed the direct line to the P-51 command frequency. "Mustang leader, this is Molesworth Ops. Do you copy? Group A3 has a straggler, Fortress Blackjack, critical condition, falling out near the Elba." The voice of Colonel Blakesley came back, calm despite the background roar. "Ops, I copy. We're pushing maximum endurance now. We have 2 flights breaking off to cover Blackjack. They are 25 miles past our estimated recovery fuel margin." There was a long moment of static-filled silence. I heard the faint, terrifying whoosh of an engine being pushed past its limit. The P-51s were burning their reserve, their absolute last resort, to protect 24 men already condemned by their crippled aircraft. Then, the sound of battle, rapid bursts of .50 caliber fire, punctuated by shouts. A final, definitive transmission from Mustang Flight 2. "Blackjack is secured. Hostiles disengaged. We have 5 kills. Repeat, hostiles disengaged. We are escorting Blackjack back toward the formation, but our fuel is redlining. We are committed." Committed? It meant they were flying on fumes, risking their own lives to maintain the promise of the escort. They had entered a zone where a successful engagement meant a guaranteed, dicey return home, potentially gliding into neutral territory or ditching in the channel. The silence that followed was absolute. The bulk of the B-17s, battered but intact, hit the target and began their turn back. They had done it. They had flown to Berlin and back, with continuous escort. The mission reports trickled in over the next 12 hours. The damage to the B-17s was still high, but the losses were astonishingly low for such a deep strike, only 4 planes from our group, compared to the 15 we would have lost 6 months earlier. The most critical data, however, came from the Mustang pilots. The sheer number of enemy aircraft they had destroyed was unprecedented. The 4th and 357th Fighter Groups alone claimed over 50 kills. But the raw numbers weren't the victory. The victory was in the identity of the kills. I pored over the interrogation reports of the few captured German pilots and the detailed gun camera footage from the Mustangs. "They weren't aiming for the bombers anymore, Major," a P-51 pilot explained, his eyes still shining with adrenaline. "They were aiming for us. We were the priority target. They realized that if they didn't eliminate the escort, they would lose the battle entirely." I looked at the updated Luftwaffe casualty statistics compiled by intelligence. The curve of their losses, which had been steady and worrying for the Germans, was now spiking upward violently during the big week. The P-51 had achieved 3 decisive strategic goals. 1. Eliminated the sanctuary. No German industrial target was safe from a continuous, coordinated American daylight attack. 2. Shifted the doctrine. The Luftwaffe was forced to commit its valuable, trained pilots to engaging the escorts, rather than simply ambushing the bombers. 3. Induced attrition. The P-51 was simply a superior dogfighter to the Me-109 and FW-190 when flown by experienced pilots, especially at high altitude. For every American plane lost, the Germans were now losing 2 or 3, and crucially, they were losing the men, pilots, who took years to train, at an unsustainable rate. The war in the air was being won not by the sheer volume of our bombers, but by the relentless, technological reach of the P-51 Mustang. It was the industrial might of Detroit combined with the engineering brilliance of Rolls-Royce, focused into a single, deadly weapon that could span the European continent. The German system, built on tactical efficiency within a known range, was cracking under the pressure of continuous, full-depth engagement. They could replace aircraft, but they could not replace the tactical acumen of their veterans. The Mustangs were methodically eliminating the core of the Luftwaffe. I sat back, the exhaustion finally hitting me. I was no longer the accountant of the dead. I was an observer to the strategic turning point. The scale had finally tipped. Spring 1944 arrived at Molesworth. The base felt different. It was still a place of intense, grinding stress, but the atmosphere was no longer defined by the dread of predictable losses. Now, there was a palpable sense of purpose, a cold certainty that the odds, while still lethal, had shifted in our favor. I stood on the tarmac, watching a squadron of P-51DS, the newer model with the bubble canopy, taxi out for a routine patrol. They were sleek silver, almost impossibly graceful machines, humming with the contained power of the Merlin engine. They looked like creatures perfectly evolved for the thin, cold air of 30,000 feet. I thought back to the Frankfurt mission, the crippling losses, the flat eyes of Lieutenant Kramer. We were signing death warrants then. Now, when I signed the mission orders, I was signing them with the knowledge that the young men going up had a fighting chance, a mathematically significant chance, to complete their objective and return. The P-51 was a miracle of engineering, yes, but its true power lay in the way it restored the morale of the bomber crews. They had been told for years they were flying fortresses, invincible. They knew that was a lie. The Mustang gave them back their truth. It gave them back the protection they had been promised. The price was still high. We continued to lose good men, both in the bombers and in the escort. But the losses were no longer strategically fatal. They were the unavoidable cost of gaining air superiority. I looked at the map in my office. The blue line of escort coverage now completely dominated Germany. The Reich was open territory. The Luftwaffe was battered, scattered, and fighting a defensive war of desperation. The air war had been fundamentally changed by a single factor: range. It was a victory not of ideology or brute strength, but of logistical superiority and technological ingenuity. We had built a machine that could conquer distance, and by doing so, we had conquered the German defense. I closed my ledger. The mathematics of death finally balanced, though never forgotten. The Mustangs were beautiful, deadly, and utterly vital. They were the silent promise fulfilled, the manifestation of America's industrial might soaring high above the clouds. We called them Mustangs, but to the men they saved, flying deep and staying until the last B-17 was safe, they were simply the angels of the skies.